Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing Edge of Tomorrow. Released in 2014, it was directed by Doug Liman. It stars Tom Cruise, Emily Blunt, and Bill Paxton. This movie is about doing things over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Okay, maybe that much over. Again, now this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 10-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. This kind of kicks right in, right? We didn't have like a big, long opening sequence. We just kind of jumped right into the movie, yeah?
I mean, they had the news thing, right? Kind of trying, like, you kind of see that a lot, right? Where like they try to use the news to kind of exposition the story.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
just to give us an idea of what's happening.
Yeah. And most of the time, I think it does work whenever you do it like this in a montage. Like I'm thinking like, you know, like Dawn of the Dead and a couple other ones where like they use radio and TV to kind of exposit, you know, what you need to know.
Do they use real news footage in these, or do they manufacture it all?
Like a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think like a little bit they might have. But obviously any of the war stuff they kind of probably threw in there. I mean, we kind of brought up the fact they're actually using real news anchors from like...
Is that like weird? I mean, we see that. I mean, we've obviously seen that in movies for some time now, but there was a point where it didn't feel that way. Anchors were definitely just actors pretending to be news people. And then at some point it was like, oh, wait, that's actually someone from... Yeah,
I feel like for some reason at one point, like it was like the Channel 5 people. And I was like, did Channel 5 have like have a contract with movies where they're like, let's
be a little specific. So Channel 5, do you mean Los Angeles? What do you say?
Yeah, KTLA or whatever.
Yeah, they got to pull in the Los Angeles anchors. I think my question is this more of a reflection on how fake the news is because the anchors can so easily turn into actors?
It's funny because when I saw that and I brought that up, my initial thought was it's better that they do, because I feel like, and I don't know why, maybe it's just the difference between an actor and a news anchor. Whenever they use actors to pretend to be news anchors, it never comes off as real.
What do you mean, anchor man?
I don't know if it's just
like the most realistic depiction.
Oh yeah, 155%. It works every time.
Oh my goodness. Yes, we get through the montage. We kind of learn what's happening. Do we get a really good introduction into the creatures at this point? We haven't really seen them, have we?
No, it's much more about the technology with the jackets, the combat jackets, and Rita.
Well, maybe it's a good point to talk about that tech, because I think we were both like, well, for me, I thought it was like cool. I like the design, but also seems kind of impractical. Like if they, like you mentioned, I think, Matt, if they could spend the money on these suits, why aren't they just building robots?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I mean, even Bobby brought up that people are cheaper, but I think that when you're going against those kind of things, like it felt like if you could do that, same thing with like the Matrix when they did it. But like, don't get me wrong, I love mechs and I love the idea of mechs, but at the same time, I'm like, if the whole point of the mech is it's automating, like you can have super strength and all that, it means that the suits could stand and walk on their own. You just shove some AI in there. Hell, you could make them into drones and just put cameras and remote control, and it would be the same thing. And you don't lose anybody in the process. And literally the suits would have the same functionality as a person being in it.
Latency. The Wi-Fi wasn't up to speed yet.
Right.
Wi-Fi on the battlefield is probably a nightmare and everything just stops working. Immediate loss.
It's the analog hole having a human in a suit.
We meet Rita, Emily Blunt, who's, we're basically poised to learn she's a hero, but we also meet Cage through that montage for the news piece where we essentially learn he's like the PR piece for, well, technically the American military, but I guess for all militaries.
It seemed like all militaries merged together to create one.
It was like the UDF, it was like United Defense Force or something. So it was kind of like a makeshift NATO or whatever they probably had to put together where like literally the entire world had to
just to be like, okay, it's time. Well, we needed a unification force. Yes, you're absolutely right. And nothing better than something that is not human for once. Is it weird that ultimately the experience he gets into is We don't ever really learn if there was like a vendetta or what's going on, that the general basically comes up with the idea of, you know what, I want to General Brigham, Brendan Gleeson, I want to send out the PR guy and put him on the front lines to get that good video action to convince people to go to war. Was there something more behind that, or was he just really just a crackpot idea?
I mean, for some reason, I thought he was getting railroaded. But now that I think of it, it's because he said at one point that he was getting railroaded. So in my mind, I kind of like extrapolated that there was more to it than that. But I feel like they didn't really explain what that was about. Like,
my interpretation of it personally was, I don't think that he did it to be vindictive or to try to set him up. I think he legit, because they very much established that Gleason's character is not a bright person in the sense of like, he's not, I don't think he's trying to be manipulative. I don't think he's trying to do something against Cage for some odd unknown reason. I think that he legit knows that he's going to get blamed when almost everyone dies. And this guy is selling the war to people effectively, apparently. And so he wants him to be basically, what would you call it? Like a spin agent, basically, to be out there. Now, I argue the effectiveness of putting that dude on the front line where he could die is dumb. They barely even did that in actual wars. They usually don't put the camera people on the front line. They're usually behind the front line recording everything.
A little Hunger Games action.
But in Brigham's mind, I guess he just thought that was the best thing to do. And you can't talk him out of anything once he sets his mind to it. So I argue that it was stupid, but at the same time, it probably made all the sense in the world to him at the time.
It's just frustrating, the idea of sending someone so inexperienced for the idea of that war propaganda when it seems like they were doing just fine without him being on the front line, right?
Clearly. He's a talker, at least at the beginning of the movie, right? So
yeah, I really built up that general to be Brendan Gleeson to be much more of like the villain of the story, as opposed to just like a guy who is kind of like the catalyst for starting everything and kind of helps along in the middle.
You could definitely see him as the bad guy in this, considering that he is sending everyone to their death in a very well publicized secret operation
that everyone absolutely talked about on the news.
He clearly is. I can't remember what general it was, but there was a general in World War II that very much was like that his mindset was, you just feed meat into the grinder and eventually you clog it up. And I think that's what his mentality seems to be, which is why he was getting ready for the downfall of his public image when it all went south, right? Because he knew it was
right. Well, there's that term fire superiority, right? So it wasn't just fire superiority, it was personnel.
And kill everyone, basically. Yeah, it's tough, the decisions that General Brigham was making, and through that process, getting Cage, Tom Cruise, to basically be enlisted. You know, we're getting a lead up here and we don't know what's going to happen, but I think we could kind of pivot into, this movie has multiple names. We called it Edge of Tomorrow, but it's also Live, Die, Repeat. And even with that, did you have an idea going into it that it was going to turn into War Groundhog Day?
No, I had no idea personally going into it that it was going to be what it was. I think that watching it in theaters, I might have seen maybe one trailer for it, maybe. And I feel like they wisely were intentionally hiding the aspect of the Groundhog Day.
That's really smart if that's what they did, because I don't really seem to remember the trailer either. I just remember being like pleasantly surprised watching the movie. Which I feel like doesn't happen that often anymore.
Well, yeah, that lead up getting to that point. I mean, we feel, I guess it's compassion or feel sad that this PR guy is being put into this terrible situation. He's being ridiculed by these other team members. He doesn't even know what he's doing, getting put into a mech suit and has to go to war, and everything just seems like it's going wrong. So, you know, we go through this moment of, I think we're trying to root for him. Like, yes, you can succeed, PR guy. And he gets the inevitable, which is the right thing to happen. He does not succeed. He just gets very lucky, right?
He survives longer than he should have that first time. for somebody with as little experiences he had, could have, maybe that was the reason why he survived, is he klutzed his way long enough through to get to the point that he did. Everyone who was trained, I mean, that first go around, Rita didn't make it either. She barely got 3 or 4 mimics in before she got hit by the whatever those missile.
One of my notes was what are the aliens volleying back at them? Are they just like, is this like a secretion? Is it like, what is it?
Acid spitters.
I just assumed it was coming out of them, but I don't actually know what they use for their weaponry.
You didn't see them in the background wearing mecha suits, like shooting.
Oh, the aliens themselves, they took over the suits to shoot back. Well, I think that's the thing. When you're first introduced to the creatures, I guess, what was your reaction to seeing their form and their movement?
Glitchy sentinels was my first thought when I watched it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were pretty neat looking. They're like urchin, like very chaotic, very like moved. They don't seem to have a form. They kind of like sticky fingers. They like grab onto something and then are able to like yank themselves over in that direction once they grab onto it. So they're this like amorphous blobs kind of.
So everything you just described, is there any reason that you think a human should be able to battle them in mech suit or not?
No, not at all.
I think that's where that glitchiness that you described, Matt, that motion that you're talking about, Bobby, I remember going like, this is so cool. And I was just kept going, mech or not, there's no way anyone's surviving against a creature this agile, this fast. Like how would you expect anyone to have a chance? It was always strange to me, just the like sheer shoot enough bullets at it. And I guess that's enough. Maybe the shoulder mounted rocket launcher is enough, but with the way they move, it's very surprising that they just didn't tear through everyone completely.
I mean, they kind of did.
Yeah, that's true. But they did because, as we learn later, they were cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they didn't have the time mechanism that we learned about, would they, I guess this is going way too far forward, but is that proof of their lack of success? Like, is it that they are dumb in that sense outside of it?
In a way, I mean, in a lot of sense. I mean, they even do it later on when Professor What's-His-Face or whatever was talking about, was it Dr. Carter?
Mm-hmm.
Was talking about the fact that you can't consider them as individuals, that they're just part of a whole body.
Mm-hmm.
They're very much like, antibodies in the human body, right? And so whenever they're sent out, they see something that's not them and they just basically kill them in that sense. And I feel that really tied a lot into, it probably really fed into the way they're designed. Because I know the one thing is this whole thing is based off of a Japanese manga. And I know the designs of a lot of this changed from that. I mean, the mech suits look much more like Halo suits in that series.
Mm-hmm.
And the aliens look drastically, well, not maybe drastically, but significantly different. And I believe watching behind the scenes, they talked about how when they were designing the creatures, they very much were going for, a formless design so that it could do anything at any time. And that does kind of remind me of like, antibodies and, killing, invaders into their system. The only difference is they're sending themselves to invade a system to be invaded. So it's just evolution, right? Like in a way, it's just getting better. I mean, we see that with Cage as the movie progresses. He goes from dropped out of JROTC and didn't, claim to be, squeamish to blood, to a badass fighter by the end of it. So they're no different than themselves.
Well, his progress is sort of it's just one big video game, right? I mean, that's my first time watching it. Point? Yeah, no, that's really what it was. My first time watching it, I was just like, oh, he's just playing a video game. You get better, you do the same things over and over, and you get better, and you eventually know the patterns, and you just kind of execute based on it because you stop learning at some point, and it just becomes, muscle memory that he's running through. You're right. We meet Rita very early, and Rita doesn't make it through that first pass on the beach. What was your first reaction seeing Emily Blunt's character kind of fully mech'd out, and more importantly for me, carrying her Final Fantasy sword?
It was the sword. Yeah. I like the design, and I think that she kind of did a good job of coming off as somebody who had experience and was kind of like a warrior soldier, much more so. At the very least, she seemed less cumbersome in her armor compared to everyone else, whereas everyone else is very clunky in their movement. Hers is very much more fluid and
Like
dynamic.
she can
and
match the creatures.
Yeah. And I love those twin blasters that she has that pops out, like the sound they make and the way they fire. Like all of it was like, at no point was I in a moment of disbelief that she was who she was in this movie.
Sure. Yeah, no, she did a really excellent job. That's a great point. I thought the same thing.
I think one of my favorite things was just that initial restart. You know, we get the death and it's just like, oh, that pop in that we become so familiar with, where he starts over on the bags. I loved Tom Cruise, just his presentation of his bewilderment and trying to figure out what in the hell is going on. Like I sat there just as confused with him. I thought he did such a good job with like being like, what is happening to me right now? I don't know what to do with any of this.
And a lot of the other people are really good too. Like the doctor was really good, like trying to figure out like, oh, okay, like you're repeating here. Like, let's hurry up and get to it. And, you know, like a lot of other people, like it was funny, like when they had the same scenario of like, what on earth is going on here?
Well, we had a lot of funny beats just through all of the resets, right? The different ways that they would cause a reset to happen that were, let's say, uncomfortable at times, or so automatic and so cruel that you couldn't help but laugh.
Right.
It's funny because like up until the third reset, I'd say, it didn't quite hit the funny point quite yet. And then he got hit by the truck on the battlefield. And then there was just a series of all that kind of stuff and him rolling underneath the truck and getting run over and just all the different sequences. And it turned something that probably shouldn't have been funny. And it had those funny moments. Like it's surprising how well it transitioned between those different like emotions of, you know, obviously you kind of had the anxiety at the beginning, like he was feeling. And then, you know, even though it was a very, you know, despairing sequence of events in the montage, it was also hilarious the way that it was presented. And then the dread that kind of happens towards the, you know, the latter half of the movie as things kind of go from bad to worse.
Well, we learned that this is a power that you get because you have, well, I forgot the type of mimic it was, that bleed all over you, and somehow that gives
alpha,
it to you. The alpha, and they said was a 1 in a billion or something for those. So
6 million, yeah.
Too many. So isn't it odd that A was on the battlefield? But one of the things that seems extra for me is, what are the chances of it happening twice? You know, it happens for Rita, that we learn. And that's, you know, how Rita was doing the reset for the Battle of Verdun, and then now for Cage.
Now, I pose this question. What if it had been Cage and it had been Kimmel instead? Or one of Squad Troop J or whatever.
So Kimmel just gets buff.
Yes. By the end of it, balls out. He's just taking out every mimic on the battlefield. But yes, it is very convenient that a 1 in 6 million experience happened twice in 2 major battles. Now, to be fair, the mimic had to be there, right? Because you need to have that mechanism on the front line so that it could learn. Because the argument could also be made, how many times did it take for them to get to that point? The reason why they knew was probably because it happened several times already.
Oh, because the mimic was already doing its own Groundhog Day to learn to get there. So it was studying. Got it. Thank you.
But that was the first time that mimic had run into Cage and had probably died to experience that. And I still had that same conversation, you know, that I said while we were watching this is, well, what happened to that mimic? Like it died and it transferred power, but technically shouldn't it still exist? Does it not remember? Like, because
can you give the mimic a blood transfusion to make it lose its power?
give it.
You'd have to trap it first.
Give it 10 pints of another one of the mimic's blood to. Wait, yeah. Why is the alpha the only one that had blood? I don't remember the other ones bleeding at all.
No, they kind of didn't. They just kind of dried up, right?
They felt much more mechanical compared to the alpha.
Metallic. Yeah, absolutely. We didn't get into it, but we talked about Rita and Cage. We'll kind of get into more of their connection. But what about the rest of J Squad? How do we feel about Skinner, Kimmel, Griff, Ford, Kuntz, Nance?
You remember
And
way
apparently
more names than I
Takeda.
did.
Yeah.
Takeda, who we didn't
which was-
really know.
I think I brought that up later when he popped up. I was like, where did this guy come from? He was literally a nothing.
He was the gunner at the end.
And then there
If
he
I was Cage, it would take me so many times to remember everything. I have such a bad memory. I'd be like, oh no, not like, oh right, I forgot about this, Dad.
You're just, it's in perpetuity. You're just living it forever and ever. It's like infinity. Does that mean you wouldn't try to get better?
Well, wasn't there like some kind of like, I don't know if it's a, like, I thought somebody said that Groundhog Day took like 10,000 years or whatever for him to actually learn everything. You know, like somebody said something weird about that. I wonder how much actual time it would take. Like, how many times has he lived these? You know, and then one time he just like tried to abandon and live and ended up getting killed anyway. So
no, I mean, that's where you get Rita or the other people who he has to recant the story to, asking how many times have we done this?
mm-hmm.
I mean, that number alone, I don't know that we get the clearest sense of the time frame that happens, because that first go round, it's really quick. It's really quick to the beach. It's really quick to the death. But then we eventually see, oh, he's practicing in between. There's running and drills that are happening. You're going like, oh, maybe this day is a little bit longer than we initially feel. 10,000 years is a lot, Bobby.
It is. It is. I would be tired after that.
Would you watch this movie if it was like another 2 hours was tacked on of just more montage of resets?
And
Like Bobby already shook his head no. He's like, nope.
Well, I do feel that like they did a really good job of putting it into a montage in all the instances where they did that. So obviously the very beginning, and then when they did the training montage, and then like the beach after they do the training, they did a really good job of montaging that to the extent where you got the gist of it and it told the story that you kind of needed to tell without it feeling too long. But at the same time, could they have gone further? Like one of my favorite TV shows growing up was Stargate SG-1. And there is an episode where two of the characters end up in a Groundhog Day scenario, and they try to solve it. They go through all the stuff or whatever, but eventually they get to the point where they literally show them like in front of the Stargate with it on, and they have golf clubs hitting golf balls into the Stargate through the portal. And like, I kind of would have liked to have seen like a little thing where you just see him like, you know, trying to have fun with it almost, but then I guess it could have taken away from the seriousness a little bit, but
would it be an element like, let's say we have a scene where he actually becomes friends with Master Sergeant Farrell, Bill Paxton?
Yes.
And they have like a good bro moment together?
They're playing cards and he's like, I thought this wasn't a thing. I was like,
Or he gets Bill to eat a card?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we all appreciated Bill Paxton as Master Sergeant Farrell just because there was just a little bit of nuance and smirk that you felt like he's like, I'm fucking with Cage the entire time, and he could deal. Like it's just so
he's
good.
Pretty good.
We get, there is so many start over points here, but I think one of the key things is them just building that relationship between Cage and Rita, where that disconnect, right? Cage basically is falling in love with her. Now, it isn't, from that standpoint of we're going to have a traditional love movie, but he develops a very clear, like, loving care for this person because of the sheer count of deaths that he had to watch. And then you kind of learn from her perspective that she had the same thing for someone else, because that rinse and repeat is so not healthy. I think Matt, you mentioned like the trauma that he's going through. Like how do you even survive this? Like, how does your mind stay intact to push through all that?
Well, dying. I mean, there's obviously experienced the loss of Rita and just like everyone in general, but experiencing death as many times as he probably did in all the different ways that he did. Like, yeah, I can't even imagine like that would be, isn't that like a level of hell or something that you have to go through? Like literally just dying and like being regenerated and coming back or whatever. So no, I can only imagine like what like mental capacity you'd have to be able to make it through that, especially it's not even like, he's, because you look at like Groundhog Day, which is obviously a very easy comparison to this movie, where like he goes through his trying to end it sequence where he just gets tired of everything. And like at one point, like when he gets into a tub and throws like a toaster in there and, goes through all the different ways, like Cage is getting like dismembered by aliens, and for all we know, they ate them, and like all kinds of different things that potentially could be happening. And he remembers all of it.
Yeah, that feeling can't be good. The scope of the power and understanding that it can be removed by bleeding out. Were you satisfied with that creating the loss? I don't know. I was one for, like I said, for me, that extra 2 hours of just seeing continued repeats. I'm kind of here for it. This is the video game, enjoyer of me that was just like, yeah, play again.
That would actually be a hilarious video game where there's literally almost no way you can actually succeed, but you always start back at the same point all over again.
Oh,
bleeding out is good. Good way to kind of.
I mean, I get the gist of it. And like I said, when we were watching, I kind of had a problem with it in the sense of like, how does the DNA he acquired travel back in time with him?
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
And then how does, because then that just brings up the whole conversation of like, if I get a blood transfusion, like how does my body react to that in the first place? So, like, if anyone who's listening to this is a doctor, I'm sure they're probably like screaming at the screen or whatever. But like you would think that like wouldn't his own body like assimilate the incoming blood, like, and like at what's the threshold where the blood overrides his that he's generating?
Yeah,
because like, does this not become part of his DNA essentially? Like, then it shouldn't matter. Like.
Is that, I mean, with the testing that Rita says she experienced, I mean, wouldn't that have been clear enough to provide evidence? Like, if I can get mimic blood in our people, or they would have had the scientists to be like, oh, we can synthetically produce mimic blood, give it to everyone.
I mean, she did make the comment that she tried everything in order to try to transfer it, but
yeah, that's true.
Like, it's
that was funny.
It brings up a good point. Like, couldn't you just start, transferring it from person to person, or trying to make a synthetic version? Or the first thing I would have went for, if General wasn't Mr. Stubbornhead or whatever, he could have been like, okay, well, let's find the big blue one, capture it, and just start like hooking up an IV to it and just giving it to all my soldiers. That way we could, win this war. But
we get the, like, to me, the quintessential scene to kind of develop that character, which is them in the barn and ultimately that revelation, but because he makes her coffee and gives her 3 sugars and she has to pause and be like, wait a second, how many times have we done this? We've done this before. And we get a path leading up to that where he's revealing she's shared a lot about herself. And it just gets to that point where she's so stubborn as well. Is someone who actually went through the experience to kind of fight back at him and says, no, I'm taking off in this helicopter. I don't care what you say. We need to succeed. And then to kind of have that moment where she tells him her real middle name. Because I guess he was guessing before, or at least trying to play at it. I really appreciated that, because it was just kind of I just wanted to see him succeed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I still call it the fact that it was dumb that her mentality was, even though I know for a fact I'm going to be killed in this helicopter, I'm still going to do it for no other reason. Like, oh, you need to succeed. It was like, then why don't you listen to him then? And he's told you repeatedly, but I do have to kind of factor it in. And this kind of applies to Groundhog Day and a bunch of other stuff, is the fact that she's only known him for like a day and a half.
Right.
Trust isn't built that quickly. For him, it's easy for him because he's gone through everything. He's built a relationship with her, but she has no idea what that is. Even in the final timeline of this, they've only known each other for a couple of days at that point. So to form that kind of bond, I mean, I brought it up several times when we're watching it. Like, if somebody said the kind of stuff that Cage said, I know everything about you, I know everything that's about to happen, and accurately does it, you would think you'd be much more open to, listening to him. But in almost no scenario does that really happen outside of Rita, who's experienced it, so she understands. And then J Squad at the very end, after they get kind of freaked out by how much he actually does know. But up until then,
no one want it, right?
I don't know. Like if somebody came,
if it was the real world and if this is real world and someone came up to you and just laid all that out about your life and told you what was going to happen over the next 3 days to a T, don't you just kind of go, "Get away from me, Satan"?
No, yeah, I mean it'd be hard to
I'm the complete opposite. I'd be okay. Well, first off, lottery numbers. Do you know them? Second off. Like, what do I need to know? Like, I don't know. I guess I'd be much more open to it. Like, if somebody provides that amount of proof, somebody coming up and like, I know the future, believe me, completely different story. I know the future, by the way, duck, and then something nearly decapitates me or whatever. I'd be like, okay, 2 or 3 more things. I'm in. I
like the 2 or 3. You're like, just a little bit more. Just give me a little bit more. He loses the power. They get the tools so he can figure out where I'm calling it the mother. What was the name of the main mimic?
The Omega.
The Omega, who originally fooled Rita, who fooled Cage. They realize he's the one with the power, so they try to bleed him out. He drowns himself. He eventually figures out, because of this tool that was hidden away in a safe, that it's at the Louvre with the long queues, and they got to destroy it, but he's lost the power. So you're right. They get J Squad to buy in, and they go on this epic journey to get it done. And they execute. Sure, great. But I think Matt, you had the really good question here: is were you satisfied with the way this ended? This presented a more Hollywood or a more moviegoer friendly ending in terms of things not going sideways, when what they really did should have been sort of a final.
I mean, I guess it's one of those scenarios where I think if you were doing a typical movie and you did have that darker ending, you kind of have to have somebody to survive, like outside of it, like not like necessarily the main characters, but you look at Matrix, right? The original trilogy of Matrix with Revolutions.
Matrix 4, huh? Yeah, you look at Matrix
4. No. You had both. You had Trinity dying in the crash, and then spoiler alerts. Whatever.
Watch the Matrix.
It gets undone in the 4th one, so who cares? And then you have Neo, who sacrifices himself literally at the end, but then you have Morpheus, and you have the people that you've kind of built up over the previous couple movies that survive it, and they're like, "Thank you, Neo," and like all that. So you have somebody to kind of celebrate the sacrifice. Here, I don't know if they had the characters, because they literally all the characters we had been. I guess you could have had Farrell. Farrell could be like, "Thank you, Cage, you saved the day," or like, "I'm going back to Science Hill now. I'm going to go get some cranberries."
After he experienced like the epic battle of Cage running around him in a circle, saving all of their lives, like out of nowhere.
Technically, that didn't happen in the end timeline, but still.
No, it didn't.
So he never got to experience that.
None of that happened. He never met any of them at all.
Oh.
Yeah. He literally jumped straight because they had to. They didn't have enough time, right? So yeah,
and J Squad disappears. Yeah, you're right.
To answer the question about what version I'd kind of prefer, me personally, I think I prefer the darker version. I think that this one was probably a happy ending version that I'm okay with for the most part. I argue why killing it in the future killed it in the past too. And again, why did it not go all the way back in the past? Like, why did it only go back to that moment in the helicopter? I remember when I watched it, my initial impression was like, oh, okay. Like I was kind of for it, but the more I watch it, the more I'm like, I kind of wanted the dark ending where it was just a sacrifice, right? But
like that was my question. Why did it go back to the helicopter other than to like just go to the beginning of the movie?
Yeah, that was basically
it was Cage, right? Because it was Cage that we were dealing with. I mean, I think, Bobby, you mentioned that they're talk about a sequel.
Yeah, I had heard that they're kind of working, but I mean, I've been hearing that for a long time, like years. So I don't know how what twisting stories the comic book took, but I don't know. Like, I don't really see it. I don't know like how you would sequelize this.
I would lobby for I'm tired of sequels.
Other than to not have the repeating scenario and just kind of have, I mean, you have all the characters who didn't do anything, but he knows all the character. I mean, maybe you can bring J Squad back together again for another
one more romp as J Squad
happened, right? Yeah, right.
There was actually a second Omega. It
feels very like Starship Troopers all of a sudden somehow.
But
yeah, there's a lot of Starship Trooper vibes.
To be fair, though, I think that that's a good analogy to why you shouldn't. I feel like this movie falls in the category of it shouldn't have worked, but it did. Mm-hmm. And so trying to repeat that for the same reason why I wouldn't want to see Starship Troopers 2, I don't want to see a sequel to this. I don't think the only way you could really do it is if somebody was like, I have a genius idea of where to take this that's not retreading, that's not, derivative of what this one was. It's a legit continuation of that story that doesn't also negate the story. I don't see the path for that, but maybe, I don't know, maybe, they had China and Russia coming through at the end, liberating Europe. Maybe they find the Omega's body and they just develop time travel. But that's also the reason why I thought that Independence Day 2 was dumb. Like there was no reason to make that movie for the very same reasons, other than I would have loved to see an Independence Day 2 where it was humanity uses the technology to kind of goes into like World War III or something.
I don't even think I've seen that movie.
Don't. And
But
don't
that would be the fear of them making
either.
a sequel here, right?
No.
not going to suggest it. Not going to suggest it.
We have to wait a few more years for it to reach our criteria, probably.
just a bit. We've definitely gone long here, but I think with a good reason in terms of everything kind of that happens with this movie. But man, there's just so many cool things because of that Groundhog Day and seeing everything that happens and the moments that the characters share as they repeat everything over and over. I'm definitely leading the witness for myself. Bobby, do you recommend Edge of Tomorrow / Live Die Repeat / what was the other one, Matt?
All You Need Is Kill.
All You Need Is
Kill.
Yeah, I'm absolutely recommending it. I mean, I think it was really fun. It was really well done. It moves well. I mean, it's really clever. It hits the right tones for me. I mean, I think it works. Is it 100% perfect? No, we could probably pick it apart a little bit like we did, but I mean, I don't think that distracts too much for me, but I think it's an entertaining ride.
Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's I don't think that it creates anything brand new that we haven't seen parts and pieces of from other franchises before, but I think that it combines it in a smart enough way that it's entertaining. It doesn't feel like you're dragging your feet at all as you're watching it. It's not, going into a territory of boredom at any point. Like you said, there's things that you probably could tear apart on it. I'd probably say it's probably up there on my Tom Cruise movie list.
Sure.
I think that Emily Blunt was great. I think all the actors in this did a really great job. I think the visual effects never became too, in your face.
Yeah.
The setting was well done. And, the only thing that I probably kind of wish it kind of had a bit more of is a better score. Like it was a very unintrusive score, which maybe that was intentional. So you were focused more on what was going on.
The battle, the repeats.
Yeah. But besides that, if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you have seen it, watch it again. I can't really say there's a person I'd say that shouldn't at least check it out.
If you like Cocktail as his number one movie, that might might challenge the tier of Tom Cruise movies. No, I'm obviously in agreement. I think for me, the thing I definitely enjoyed was that sort of that grind, that video gaminess, the thing that makes you feel like, man, he's playing a really difficult game of Dark Souls and he can't get away from it, that he's just trying over and over to defeat this mega boss. And that's just something that really is right up my alley. And as much as, yes, I agree, no sequel, I could have maybe taken like at least four more little repeat options to get a little more humor, a little more things interesting to see the world even more. It's just such a cool movie. That's how I'm going to put it. I think it's such a cool friggin' movie, and yes, everyone should definitely watch this one. As always, thank you for listening. And if it's all the same to you, I'm tired. I'm in pain. I'd rather just start fresh.